Thank you for joining us for this sermon podcast from United Christian Church of Austin, where no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're invited and welcome. This sermon for Sunday, April 19th, 2015 is entitled Foodie. It's a reflection on a reading from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to learn more about our open and affirming ministry at United Christian Church, simply head over to our website, www.uccaustin.org. Thank you.
Our reading today comes from the New Testament, from the Gospels, from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. Let us listen together with all of our heart and our mind and all of our strength and with all of our soul. Now on that same day, that is, the day of Christ's resurrection, two of the disciples were leaving Jerusalem to go to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles away, and talking with each other about all of the things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all of the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be crucified and condemned to death. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all of this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and they told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart, to believe that all the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all of the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with him, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us when he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered there. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Friends, God is still speaking to the world. May our hearts be open to listen and respond. Amen.
So first thing off the bat this morning, I need to know who are the four most fidgety people in this room right now? Who are the four of you that have the hardest time sitting still? And notice I asked this after the children left. So you can't hide behind them. Who are the four most fidgety people? Raise your hands. Jane? I need, Maddie is definitely one up here. Ian, another. All right, so one more. Got David back there. We're going to start this with you guys. If you could take that back to Jane, please. And we'll get one for David. Now what this is, here we go. Everybody knows what this is, right? Just the outside part. What is it? It's the mason jar, right? If you could pass that down to David. There we go. Now we're going to start with you guys, but we're going to pass it around. Because what it is a mason jar filled with heavy cream. And so what you guys need to do is shake that. And if you can shake it so that the cream hits the back and the top and the bottom of that jar as much as possible. Yeah, this is not going to quite do it. Because what we're going to do here is make butter. How many of you have actually ever done this before? This way.
Oh, no.
I was already talking to some people earlier today who said they used to make butter with a churn this way, going to Granny's house, right? Well, this is a trick that a friend of mine taught me. This is the most magical science experiment I have ever done. I did this 3 times in my own house just to watch it happen. And so what you need is to shake that and just keep shaking it. It's going to be about 10 or 15 minutes. That's all it takes. That's why you're going to pass it around. Okay? Because we need fresh arms passing those off and doing that. It's sealed up nice and tight. And after a while, it's really kind of magical. After about 4 minutes, it's sloshy now, right? You can hear it slosh back and forth. In about 4 or 5 minutes, it's going to go absolutely dead silent, because at that point, it's going to have turned into whipped cream. I know, but without sugar in it. Less fun. And if you keep going, the quiet will end and it'll actually start thudding back and forth. And that's all the milk solids forming into the butter. And it's banging back and forth on the top. So it's left just milk solids and buttermilk. So we're going to hope to get that way. So you guys just will keep doing that and passing it around. It's a wonderful way of keeping attention focused on that. Because today I want to talk about food. How many of you have eaten today? Anything at all, right? How many? All right, well, keep your hand up. Keep your hand up. How many of you ate yesterday? Is that going to get an even larger group? All right, I am hoping that you are all eating on a regular basis. You can put your hands down. Now, how many of you in that same time period, yesterday to today, have had a meal? An actual meal. This does not include driving through. All right, so you can put your hands down. If you ate at Top Notch, this is not you. Okay. Now, this does not include anything that came directly from the freezer in a cardboard box and was an entire meal encapsulated all together. This does not include going to the grocery store and picking up one of those bags of meals for 2 that's already made. Okay. So it's a little fewer people. You can put your hands down. What makes a meal rather than just eating? What makes a meal? Maybe saying a blessing at the beginning of the meal. That's a wonderful way. You know, I'll confess, I don't do that all the time, but every once in a while I'll stop and remember to do that. And it changes me from just eating to something closer to a meal. What else makes a meal?
Conversation. Company.
Sitting with your family, or somebody up here said, having company for a meal, right? What else? Oh, that it actually takes some preparation to do. It's not just, that thawing is not preparation enough for a meal, perhaps. There's some occasions when we might say that, right? And it's a meal that you share with someone. This is, so as a single person, and maybe other single people in the congregation can identify, it's hard to have a meal. I eat a lot, but I don't have meals very frequently. It's one of the great things about me moving back home to Austin is that occasionally I actually get to have meals with my family, right? And I'm not sure that Thanksgiving and Christmas count, right? Because even though you're generally sitting down, you're not driving through, I hope, and even though it's generally something more than thought, in fact, oftentimes there's a whole lot of preparation that's gone into it, and you are sitting down with family and also friends at that time, there can be a lot of tension around Thanksgiving and Christmas. Things you only do once or twice a year tend to get surrounded with all kinds of thou shalt, right? Then thou shalt nots. I remember the time that I brought rosemary mashed potatoes to Thanksgiving supper in my family. And we did not generally have rosemary mashed potatoes. And my nephew looked at it and said, "Oh, why are there sticks in the mashed potatoes?" Right? Now, tell me, are there thou shalts and thou shalt nots around your Thanksgiving meals and your Christmas and Easter meals? What are some of those? What must be on the table? Now, I know it's not just any turkey either, right? Because we know when someone does the turkey wrong, it ruins everything, right? I mean, it's still perfectly edible and everything, but we do not fry in this family, right? Maybe you're a roast turkey family. What else must be on the table? Jimmy's dressing for Thanksgiving. Absolutely. Right? You better learn that recipe because he's looking a little pale. We never know about him. Right? I remember my family is my grandmother's frozen cranberry salad. Now, I know that she got this recipe out of a magazine somewhere because it included Miracle Whip. But that was on every Thanksgiving table my entire growing up. And that was definitely, when we lost that was a must. Michelle. What do you think? Do you have to eat meat for it to be a meal? No, not at all. Not at all. Vegetarians are people too. In that place, right? Even here in Texas. But these meals, we have special meals along the way. Remember, if you were here for our Maundy, Thursday service, when we were having a meal together out in the fellowship hall, we were set down in tables, by about 8 or 10 to a table, with people that we maybe don't get a chance to sit down all that often with, and have a conversation, and talk about some things that are important around the table. And I think that's part of what it is to have a meal together. Jesus had a lot of meals. As one commentator I read this week in preparation for our sermon time said, Jesus just seems to eat his way through the gospel. Right? Think about all the times that Jesus ate. Now we know Jesus was a human being like you and me, so he ate hopefully every day, right? But think about all the times that it was important enough for the gospel writers to talk about Jesus eating. What are some of those meals with Jesus that you remember? Right, when he's at the wedding feast in Cana, right? Not just a meal, but a feast. And Jesus is there to make sure that it's a special feast. He doesn't make like a California Merlot. He makes a really, really nice wine, right? For that. That can be part of it as well. What other meals? Right, the feeding of the 5,000, right? Where Jesus took just the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he made it enough for a multitude of 5,000 people. Remember, that's the only story, or one of the only stories that's told in all 4 Gospels. And in fact, it was such an important story. It told us something so important about Jesus that 2 of the Gospel writers decided to tell it again. And they called it the feeding of the 4,000, like no one would notice. Right? But if you think about it, that in just one Gospel, that's 9,000 meals that were recorded with Jesus. When else? I'll give you a hint. We just read one. What's that?
At the end, when the disciples come to the shore, they find the fish on fire.
Right. There's stories of even the resurrected Jesus having meals with his disciples. Tells us something about what the resurrection is going to be like. I, for one, would have a hard time facing an eternity without good food in that place, right? What other times? What sort of people did Jesus eat with? Neil.
Yeah, Jesus invited himself to dinner with Zacchaeus.
Absolutely. Remember Zacchaeus, the wee little man who climbed up in the sycamore tree to see Jesus? And Jesus looks up at him and he says, Zacchaeus, come down. I am going to eat at your house today. And you remember, aside from being short, what Zacchaeus was? Tax collector. Does that mean that he was a dedicated civil servant working for the IRS? No. Remember that in Jesus' time, when it always says Jesus ate with tax collectors and sinners, that these two are interchangeable words. That tax collectors were traitors to the Jewish people working for the Roman Empire. And not only that, but they were loan sharks as well. They could keep as much money beyond what they owed the Romans as they could squeeze out of people. So Zacchaeus was a thief. And Jesus went and ate with him. Who else? Fern. At the very Last Supper, Jesus sitting at table with his disciples. Also not a very distinguished group of folks, right? So Jesus on the Last Supper, the night before he is betrayed and goes to death, all the people at that table, every single person at that table, not just Judas, not just Peter, every single person at that table is going to go, thump, and disappear. And Jesus calls them what? Friends. Even in that place, Jesus sitting at table with people who would betray and deny and desert him, and he calls them friends and shares a meal with them. And Jesus also ate not only with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes, but also with Pharisees. It didn't get very far. The conversation was kind of stilted. It was like one of those off Thanksgiving years, right? But it says that Jesus ate with them too. In fact, they're the ones who pointed across the table and said, we're the nice folks. Why have you invited those folks to eat your very best fried chicken? Right? So Jesus, this is an integral part of the gospel for Jesus. Something important happens at this table. Note that Jesus has all of these meals with people, and yet he never teaches at a university. He never goes on a lecture tour of high-steeple synagogues around the area. In fact, his one time preaching in the synagogue didn't go so well, right? Jesus chose the table, and not a fancy communion table, but the very kind of table that you have in your house, and not the nice table in the dining room that nobody's supposed to touch, right? But Jesus picked the kitchen table to be a central symbol of the gospel, of what he was going to do. Because there were strict rules about who you could and who you could not eat with at that time. Remember that good Jews, observant Jews who were keeping kosher, could not eat with Gentiles. A good Jewish man could not eat with a woman at the table. You certainly didn't stoop to eat with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes. Jesus is telling us something about God's table when he does that. We've talked about all these meals that Jesus has, but remember the image that he uses for the kingdom of heaven over and over again, that it's going to be like a banquet for everyone, and it's going to be an unexpected guest list. It's going to be all the people that you thought for sure you were not going to see. One of my favorite books, If Grace is Real, has a wonderful image of heaven. That you go to heaven and you are seated at the heavenly banquet, and you are seated between the person that you need most to forgive and the person who needs most to forgive you. Think about your neighbors at that table. There's something profound about this symbol. And in this congregation, we come to the table over and over and over again. It's one of the things I love about our life together and our disciples' tradition. In the churches that I grew up in, we had communion once a month, whether we needed it or not. But to come and have this be the central symbol of who we are and what we're about. It's not something high up and far away and highfalutin. It's not something privileged or powerful. It's something that we do every single day, I hope. We eat together. But to take time and to take the eating and make it more, make it a meal with God. It's hard, I know. We have just this little tiny piece of bread, right? And we've got just this little tiny sip of juice or wine that's hardly even worthy of the name. But we take these very simple things and we imagine what God has done with them. Because God has taken simple things and simple people like us and done amazing things with us and promises to do even more. We come to this table to be fed by faith, to have a meal of communion with God. Amongst the simple things, a bowl, measuring cups, a butcher block, a little bit of bread, some juice. This is where God has promised to meet us over and over and over again. I would invite you to try and reclaim some of that sense of a meal when we come to the table on Sunday mornings and at other times when we gather as a community of faith. There are so many other times in our lives when we are too busy just driving through, right? Picking up something to go on the way out. Eating for fuel. I would invite you to reclaim this table as the center of our faith together and this meal that Jesus shares with us. And so this morning, to help us do that, you guys are already making the butter. How's it going, by the way? starting, it's chunky. Keep going. Keep going until we get to communion time, then we'll bring it on up. And to help us also, you may have smelled it as you came in, but this morning, actually, so this is gluten-free pumpernickel bread that we made in the 9 o'clock service. I sat here and had everything laid out on the table. It was a mess. And we put it all together and we put it in the bread machine to cook during our 10 o'clock hour. So we've got this warm, fresh bread to help us reclaim some of that sense of a meal that Christ shares with us here. Sorry to say it's the same old juice and wine, but it's a little bit of a symbol, and if you'll stay after, there's always leftovers from God's table. Always. So if you want to stay after and have a little bit more and try some of that delicious, fresh, creamy, light butter that you're making, we will eat that together after worship today. So let's pray. Dear God, we give you thanks for all the ways that you meet us in the simple stuff of life, the very human stuff where you bless us. We ask you to meet us here at this table as you have promised to do, as you did for disciples who come before. Meet us in these simple signs, these simple people in communion with you, sharing the meal that is the foretaste of the kingdom that is to come for one and for all. In your holy names we pray.